And I'm super delighted to have these four. It is surprisingly hard to get people to come and join a panel about the future role of JICs. But we're going to show this is light-hearted and fun, and we're not going to bring farmyard animals into it. So,
that wasn't in the brief.
It was not in the brief. That's nice. Jeff will go off-piste sometimes, but that's all right. So let's just dive straight in. In a fast-changing media market, Neil, what role do you think JICs can and should be playing to support buyers and sellers?
Yeah, so I think
And just quickly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Neil McEneany. I'm the President and CEO of Numeris. We are the audio-video JIC in Canada. So the evolving role of JICs, I think it's changed and continues to change. And when you look at why is it evolving, you have to start with value. What are you trying to do? And so when we look at value, in terms of the buy and the sell side, in the last number of years, we've done a number of things in terms of getting into cross-platform video. So therefore, you can look at online video, you can compare it to linear, you can do it by platform, by device, and that's what they need. You know, more recently, we're about to launch a set-top-box system, a national set-top-box solution that integrates with the TV data that also drives value. You get to get stability, you get to measure unmeasured channels before. So the role of JIC is to first and foremost understand where's the value and deliver that value against the buy and the sell side.
Or help the buyers and the sellers understand value?
I would say the value in terms of how do they optimize their investment in media from buy and sell side to understand behavior and the consumer journey. They need to have stronger data, trusted data, audited data, standardized data, transparent data, under which they can have a foundation to then leverage that data for purposes of establishing that value that they need to then optimize their media investments and their media plans. So and I think that role has to continue to evolve because the value is endless. You have to continue to address it.
Cool, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Phil Smith, I'm Director General of ISBA. We represent the UK's leading advertisers. Role of the JICs, wow. Accountable, trusted source of data, agreed by buyers and sellers. But I think the important thing is we need to unpack what they're for. It's why I think, Neil, you said when we were on the call the other day, they serve a multiple number of needs. For some, they are a hard currency, and they sit right at the heart of trading. For others, it's much more about planning, reporting, optimization, evaluation. And I think what we're seeing now is people unpacking those needs as they think about the future of the JICs for their individual industries.
We will 100% return to that very important point. Mr. Laycock?
Hi, I'm Matt Laycock. I'm the Client Services Director at Barb, the TV JIC for the UK. Broadly agree with what Neil and Phil have said, to be honest. And one thing that did spring to mind when I was looking at this is that recently Charlie Munger passed away, who was Warren Buffett's right-hand man. And one of the things that he said was that it's better to buy a good thing at a fair price than a fair thing at a good price. And I think JICs are important in establishing what constitutes pricing and helping people to understand exactly what is a fair price and a good price in the market. And that shared level of language and understanding, I think, underpins some of the things that Phil and Neil have just talked about. Very little to disagree with respect to, you know, exchanging value, understanding different ways that we can look at the data in terms of informing people's strategy beyond just the currency and looking into measurement too. But in general, I think from our point of view, it is about making sure that everybody is on the same page and can work frictionlessly.
Cool. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Lofthouse from dentsu.
Yes, I'm Catherine Lofthouse, client partner at dentsu. Look, I mean, we've talked about data, and we've talked about measurement and value. But for meaning to be bridged between arguably an analog into a digital world, I think the JICs place can be a conduit or a bridge between those. And I think that really understanding how we can integrate, a lot of the value that we have, from more traditional ways of measuring success and more data-driven ways is really where I think we're going to be netting out. So, yeah.
Cool. Okay. An initial show of hands. Let's dive into the details. So, I have to say, if I have to sit on another panel at which we do the what's the difference between measurement and currency thing, I'm going to lose the will to live. Do we need to do it now, or can we skip quickly over it?
I mean,
Ask the audience.
Yeah.
Do you want to do measurement versus currency, or can we jump on? Jump on. Fine, we're going to jump on. In which case, let's talk about transparency. So, no matter which way you come at the JIC question, everybody will say that the JIC's role is to talk about transparency. I have to say, I thought James Rook's speech this morning was a really powerful summation of some of the changes in the TV space, and transparency was front and center in what he spoke about. I guess what I'd just love to kick the tires on a little bit is, what are the institutional arrangements that underpin transparency? What role do the JICs play in ensuring transparency in measurement and currency? I can see that rolling eyeballs slightly. It's a long question.
I'm just kind of thinking about this in general. I think.
Yeah, what's your sense? I mean, I'd love to hear from the others.
I mean, a good starting place is to say, well, what principles are you looking to uphold? And
sure.
I mean, shamefacedly, I have my notes in front of me, but I did want to make this point accurately. The WFA principles actually are a really good place to begin. And if you read them out, it says things like transparency is visible to the industry. There's a good description and guidance of how a currency works and what it delivers and how the processes play out. There's regular review by technical committees. There's oversight functions that are employed to make sure that things are done the right way. And there's regular audit of data collection practices and input data sets. Now, apologies for reading that out, but it's important to say that when you're building a JIC, you have to be building it around a set of principles that are agreed upon and understood. And those WFA principles are agreed and understood globally. That's why they are there. So that seems like a good place to start. And when you talk about, well, what processes do you put in place? Well, you look down those principles and you put them in place. So Barb, for instance, has a variety of technical committees. It does have, a situation where it is audited. Audit happens in terms of the way that data is included into the data sets that are being included with Barb as well. So we're going to take C-Flight on. There's got to be an understanding that data that is being shared from the broadcasters about their ad delivery is kosher and can be used to understand what is happening in that marketplace. So you start in that kind of way and just follow through on the principles and set up the situation that is required in order to give the principles life.
And if I'm a customer of Barb, then the minutes of those meetings, those audits, those reviews, that's all available.
I mean, the whole point of a joint industry currency is it's transparent, accountable. Right. If you ask us questions, we will give you answers.
Cool. Neil, anything to add?
Yeah, I fully agree with Matt, and I think transparency, to really be practical about the matter, is you need to follow it up with action. And so to the extent that you say you're transparent and you say that the industry is involved, they need to be involved. They need to be part of the conversation as to what they need. They need to be part of the conversation to understand the methodology. They got to trust the data. And they have to trust what you're doing with the data. That way, they can use the data. So I think it's transparency obviously is the cornerstone of what we do, but you definitely need the industry's involvement. It's got to be actionable. And I think greater transparency also drives greater accountability. So I think the both have to fit hand in hand.
So let's turn to the buyers then. So you've heard our two JIC reps. I guess the obvious question is, do you think buyers are aligned and would be supportive of that? And then obviously the kind of pig in the poke, so to speak. I knew we'd get pigs in somehow. If buyers are aligned and are supportive of Neil and Matt, who make a very clear, cogent argument about the importance of transparency, why do you keep pouring money into platforms which don't appear to adhere to these principles? In other words, do the advertisers actually give a JIC about transparency and accountability in the way that Matt and Neil think they should? Phil?
Yeah, look, I mean, the buyers do give a JIC, of course they do. But you can't ignore massive platforms with massive audiences, and money has gravitated towards them because they have offered a very compelling way of getting to audiences and delivering accountability in different ways. Now, that said, buyers, particularly the advertisers, have been on a mission to get accountable, transparent measurement for a number of years now. We published a paper with the IPA back in 2017 calling for accountable measurement. The WFA launched the framework, which thank you very much indeed, Matt. Those are the principles which we constructed in 2019. And we have brought platforms and others to the table in order just to deliver exactly that, accountable, audited data across the big platforms which now compose such a big chunk of our market. So it's a massive priority for us. My members have made it our top priority for 5 years in a row.
Just to jump on Phil's point there as well, that is what you would perhaps expect the Director General of ISBA to say, but we did an industry consultation to work out what our next steps were for Barb at the end of 2021, and everything that Phil is saying came out, right? We have to be able to adapt the measurement in order to reflect there are different viewing habits, there are different buying habits across the industry. People want to be able to look at what is happening across the whole piece. And inevitably, the impetus was given to us to go and do equivalent measurement of different platforms, different devices, audience-centric measurement, all the things that Phil is talking about, adding that to the services. That's what people want, and that's what we're striving to provide.
I think there's like a second step here, right? Because, measurement frameworks, having an understanding and a playbook, if you will, right, to engage our brands with is great. But the fast-moving pace of the needs is exactly where we end up with those walled gardens. Why do advertisers enter those walled gardens? We've touched on it, right? But they provide something really valuable, and it's end-to-end identity-based, not just measurement, but articulation of optimization, which is kind of like the next stage of this. If we truly and honestly have everything in place that we're talking about, those brilliant principles, those brilliant ambitions, then the next step, and by the way, this step is important to make it holistic, future-proofed, truly universal, is to talk about reintegrating it into optimizations. And that then, we're talking about value, proves value, and it's an ecosystem that everybody wants and get on board with. Now, of course, there are challenges. We're not naive to those. Of course, you need to be really mindful of the distinction between the value of data and the value of insight. And I think we can broadly sort of say that the data is nothing without the meaning and the understanding. We can't go to our board members and say, we've got a really good insight that we can't then action or fulfill. Because if we look towards the digital ecosystem that we're naturally gravitating towards with this area, firstly, there's a playbook for it. It works. It's cookieless. It's got great opportunity. So I think when we talk about walled gardens, casting our minds back perhaps 10 years to the digital display ecosystem might prove very, very valuable to informing how we articulate meaningfully, holistically, and in a future-proofed way all of these, things that are in play at the minute, but really pulling them together. And obviously a JIC would be a fantastic conduit for that, brings meaning and value in the long term.
Yeah, obviously future-proofing is really important. What advertisers said to us, though, was, first of all, the experience of media is now so fragmented. They're also saying the formats for the delivery of advertising are very fragmented too in creative terms. And the forms of measurement that exist today are either very, very siloed, and some of those are good and trusted and accountable, and sometimes they're siloed and they're within walled gardens. But a lot of the things that try to join up the picture at the moment are proprietary and unaudited, and therefore are problematic from the point of view of the advertisers. Some of them are very sophisticated, but what they really want is a trusted data set on which they can start to make much better decisions when it comes to planning, reporting, and evaluation. And that's the genesis of the WFA principles and the work we've been on.
So, ideally, would you therefore like the big internet platforms to become more actively involved and part of the JIC process and to submit to and agree to adhere to the principles that Neil and Matt have so coherently laid out?
I think the short answer is that you've got to ask the question what and how. One of the things that we've really worked hard on is to do this in a privacy-safe way, in a way that allows us to ingest first-party data. If there are ways in which that can be done, and if there are ways in which the different formats of media experience can be well represented within a JIC, why not? We have sought to build Origin on JIC principles, right. So that's very much embedded. We've not sought to be a JIC, nor have we sought to replace JIC. We've sought to create something which is compatible with JICs and can ingest JIC data. But in principle terms, would platforms be part of a JIC in a world of the future? I don't see any in principle reason why not.
And indeed, we don't see that either. We have started to measure SVODs, we measure video sharing services, we go across devices, we go across platforms in the UK. we have moved to do that, and that has been driven by the industry. We are a joint industry currency, by the industry, for the industry. We get the feedback from people either at our board meetings or in the meetings that we have with subscribers elsewhere. They wanted us to be able to cover those new platforms as part of our measurement. So far from like pushing them away, like we've opened our arms and
can we do the elephant in the room, which is YouTube? Because Barb has really led the way, and Numeris is doing incredible work, starting to bring the kind of like TV businesses, the SVODs, the Netflixes into the fold, which is admirable and helpful. Partly because those companies are now looking for ad dollars, and I think every buyer has said to me, if you want our money, you need to be measured on a consistent basis. YouTube is a bit of a standout. Is it just because they're big enough and ugly enough that they don't have to play by the same rules?
I'd clarify a couple of things. We've been chatting with YouTube for many years. And the issue around...
I think every JIC has been.
I think every JIC's been chatting with YouTube for a while. Let's be clear. The technology and the methodology around holistic measurement is not the problem.
Okay.
We know how to do this. Matt said we know how to do this. We're measuring SVOD today. It's not a measurement issue. It's about when and how will you bring your data to the table. So that way we can ingest it and agree, privacy protected, agree towards a measurement solution or holistic data that will deliver what advertisers want. So it's not a measurement issue. It's an issue of when we bring the data to the table.
So Phil, Project Origin, obviously, which is playing by the JIC rules, as you describe it, has managed to get Google, YouTube to come to the table with data. What are you doing that apparently the JICs aren't?
Well, we do have a very different endpoint, and I would say, we are the embodiment of where the WFA principles and the framework would wish to take us. We are looking cross-media in our aspirations. So when you say it's only YouTube that hasn't come to the table, that's within the rather narrow confines of this conference rather than within the broader confines of the digital environment. So there are many other platforms, who we would wish to be accountably measured. Sure. So that's the aspiration. And what we have done is we have made very clear what the advertisers want to see. We have brought the platforms to the table to collaborate on creating a privacy-safe way of ingesting first-party data and combining that with panel assets, and to do that in a way that allows you to create a cross-media framework, but when with a planning, reporting, and evaluation set of use cases, allows you to bring in multiple measures of quality, duration, completion. All these things are really important to us. Standards are important as well, but what we're not trying to do is to create an apples with apples currency, which would compete with and substitute for a hard trading currency. And I think that's what's helped us to unlock this progress.
Are you confident, Neil and Matt, of making progress, before we move on, I don't want to belabor the point, with the big internet walled garden platforms? Or is it... I know there's been a lot of work and attempt to make progress. It's clear, as Phil and Catherine says, that the buyers are interested in that. What's your take?
I'd say we're fortunate in the Canadian market because there's a high degree of collaboration right now. The industry association...
With the big internet platforms as well?
Yeah, so the industry associations we're working closely with them, and they're working with the various platforms to address how to build out an ad measurement solution that makes sense for the Canadian market. So those conversations have been underway for a while. They're coming to an end, and hopefully we'll be in a position to understand what's the next steps. And I think it's going to be about collaboration. It's going to be about bringing measurement assets to the table, understanding against a design that the buy side and the sell side want, and then how do we put that into play. So I'm very optimistic that the right conversations are happening with the platforms.
Cool. Matt?
I think, firstly, it's important to say that there's as many different solutions to this as there are people who are interested in it. The way that you integrate data with company X is not necessarily exactly the same as you would with company Y. And what we are seeking to do is to make sure that we have equivalence. It's interesting, Phil mentioned the classic cliche phrase at one of these conferences, apples with apples. But the WFA principles do say that consistent building blocks for measurement are required. Like that's part of the principles that are there. So that doesn't necessarily mean that the way you do it is exactly the same for everybody. but the end goal probably should be broadly similar, which allows you to be able to do that equivalence and make sure that everything is measured in broadly the same sort of way. Now, are we having those conversations with each of these companies? Yeah. Are we confident that we're going to be able to make progress with them? Yeah. We think that we're going to be able to move forward in this area, but it will be different for each of the platforms.
I'm going to take a slightly different angle on that. Of course, practically right now, that's the case. We haven't even mentioned mergers and acquisitions, right? And I think something that we've sort of skipped over is the fact that, well, if a JIC or JIC equivalent can't facilitate both a data integration space or common language to create understanding at the foundational level, then we will see big companies do it. Now, we know that there's fragmentation in the space. We know that there are walled gardens. We understand the challenge with that, but it will evolve and develop. Mergers and acquisitions will happen. Standardization in terms of the data architecture and infrastructure that underpins, all of this environment. And again, it's post-third-party cookie deprecation. What an opportunity. Of course, there are conversations that are happening with, the larger, the more advanced, walled gardens, if you will, in this space. And to put that behind the conversation, I think, would be a fundamental error, because it comes back to those questions about how do we make this holistic, how do we make this long-term, how do we make this viable, not just at a basic output level, but for an infrastructure level where we can articulate off the back of learnings a really advanced and necessary kind of toolkit that we're going to need moving into the future. I do think for now, yeah, of course it's fair, but we're not looking for now, we're looking to future-proof, and we're looking to change, analog to digital. So I would suggest we leave it digital.
Cool, I don't think many would disagree with that. So, next question then. We're all aware that TV is in a period of huge change and innovation, and you heard it on the multi-currency panel. There are now multiple ways of buying television, which is great. It gives advertisers many, many more choices. But it also means that there's pressure to try to standardize and, just like C-Flight, bring new innovations into the fold. Do you envisage JICs playing, ideally, during the 2020s, a much more expansive role? So, in other words, expanding their remits, and perhaps, as we're seeing in some markets, starting to consolidate and become super JICs, covering multiple media with single-source panels to really provide buyers with the kind of... we're in a very different marketplace than we were in 25 years ago. Should we be working towards a kind of JIC transformation during the 2020s? Phil?
I think all JICs need to think very hard about their remits and what they're delivering and how they're delivering it. And in some ways, as the need for the underpin for a hard currency becomes more limited, that should set up some freedoms. If the use cases are all about planning, reporting, evaluating, providing a basis on which people can ascribe value, then I think there are different approaches that can be taken and thought about that can then sit alongside media that's essentially biddable and not being traded on the back of the currency. But people do need to start with, why am I providing this to the market? When you look across the JIC landscape in the UK, I think the current JICs are having to ask themselves that question right now.
Matt, is there a case for Barb staging a hostile takeover of your JIC peers? I don't know what the going rate for Razor would be.
Neatly sidestepping that particular point.
In all seriousness, do you see that, should UK JICs be working towards some sort of roll-up? Because it's clear that the buyers want...
I think it's important for us to be collaborative in everything that we do, right? And that goes not just for our end users, buyers, planners, but also analysts at broadcasters or whomever else might be using the data. And so the ability for our data to be plugged into proprietary data sets and therefore also other JICs, and to make sure that there is piping that allows all of that, is definitely something that we're interested in. We've developed our own API recently that allows us to be able to give the data in bulk to people who are able to do what they want. It's been gratifying, for instance, to hear that Grace Kite over at Magic Numbers suggested that our data was really useful in terms of generating marketing mix modeling, and we would hope to be able to do that in general for everybody. I think from the point of view of rolling up all of the JICs, I mean, we've got a commitment, joint industry commitment until 2029 to do the job that we're doing.
Right.
What we want to be able to do is to make sure that we can connect and collaborate with everybody as best as we possibly can in order that we can all make progress together. And that commitment to 2029 offers us a bit of space to be able to do that.
Phil, if the UK had a single super JIC, presumably there would have been no requirement to do Project Origin.
It's a big hypothesis. And I mean, as I think about what we've been embarked upon, and picking up Neil's earlier point, you know, the issues have been much less to do with methodology and technology, and much more to do with vested interests and politics and money. And those are the things that have really driven the advertisers to step into the ring and say, we need to have a much louder voice here, which is what's happening.
And I agree with Phil in terms of the distinction between valuable cross-platform, cross-media data versus measurement solutions. And we're fortunate in the Canadian market that, you know, we're the audio-video JIC, and so a super JIC is just being more innovative and being more responsive to the market, which we benefit from that position. But in terms of the data and how the data is being used, and how the data is being used, as Matt's saying, from an API, we're fortunate also. We have a subsidiary called nLogic that drives out the data through software and different planning tools, and we're highly encouraging the industry to take a full advantage of better data to drive their planning tools through the nLogic tools or otherwise for purposes of not just waiting for measurement solutions to continue to evolve, but what are you doing between now and then on the planning side, which is what Phil was describing, because I think both have to be served at the same time. So from a super JIC perspective, I think it's just a matter of you just need to do more, and you need to do it more quickly.
And I think you need to understand why you're doing it as well.
Why you're doing it.
It's directional, it's guiding principles. Because we talked a lot about data, and we know the value and the importance of data, but you need to know where it's leading to, right? You can't, again, put the cart before the horse with this, because otherwise you'll get lost in a sea of technicalities. I think, look, the term super JIC, for me, is having the right seats at the table and making sure that there is, we've said collaboration, but the right kinds of collaboration across, you know, the spectrum of challenges. You know, mini JICs, if you want to call them that, I think would be very good at articulating the challenges, but a super JIC is, I would say, the value is about problem solving, which is really where we all want to head, right? Because you can't do that without the right voices.
As ever with these things, we've run fiendishly short of time, and there's a nasty flashing thing there saying we haven't got much time left, so let's do a quick final question then. We all know about the level of change, and it's furious, and this extraordinary event, which has grown every year and brings together great people to talk about these changes, is testament to those changes. What should the JICs be doing in the 2020s, do you think, to ensure that they're as future-proof as possible and meeting the needs of buyers and sellers? If there's one big thing, one big priority for the rest of the decade, what would you be pointing at?
I think, you know, the democracy of data and being able to get as much data as we possibly can so we can drive data insights and measurement solutions at a granular level in the interest of the industry, that's what we got to set our sights on. It has to be data-driven, it has to be trusted, it has to be transparent. We say those words, but we need to do that. And we need much more inclusiveness and to get there and deliver against the buy and the sell side.
Cool. Phil?
Really interrogate what buyers and sellers want, and don't just take the first answer, but drill down, because I think there's too much lazy thinking about what JICs are for.
Right. Matt?
Stick by the WFA principles to start with,
right,
but in so doing, also meet the challenges that are inherent in an evolving landscape. We've got to continue to develop our measurement of what people watch. It is changing, and what people buy around it is going to change too. So, piggybacking off Phil's point, make sure that you do that in the right sort of way.
Cool. Catherine, a final word?
Leading from both ends of that spectrum that we've bounced across on this panel between the directional, the understanding of the why, and the data-driven. And in doing so, in leading on both of those, you create the space in which you can succeed meaningfully.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is why you should give a JIC. Thank you so much.